Hello, this is Senior Missional Pastor Mike A. Brun. Today, I'm just going to do a little topical talk. Uh, the topic of religious organizations or organizations that have a charitable function. Are they actually in the Bible? Can we find an example? So, today I'm going to be just talking about that a little bit. Um, I'm going to be coming from the book of Romans, chapter 13. And one of the things that you're going to see is that from the 13th, chapter 13, verse 1 through 10, covers this whole topic of everything that I'm talking about when it comes to the legal aspect of any type of organization or church or whatever. See, because a lot of times we, as the people of God, we only think about the spiritual aspect of things, but we forget that there's actually a physical aspect as well. There's a natural aspect. There's a legal aspect to what we do when we incorporate ministries or structure ministries or churches or anything like that. There's a whole legal aspect of things that we have to deal with. The early New Testament church, they didn't have that structure, of course. Constantine kind of changed that when he recognized religion and even made Christianity a state religion of Rome at that time, believe it or not. But the thing is just that we have to deal with both the legal and the spiritual aspect of things when it comes to ministry. Whether we like it or not, it's a part of what we have to deal with. And even Jesus in St. Matthew's chapter 22, verses 20 through 21, you see him talking about rendering unto Caesar what's due to Caesar. That we have an obligation to deal with the natural laws of the land. And that brings me back to where I originally told you about the scripture in Romans chapter 13. Now, we're not going to read from verse 1 through 10, but I'm just going to touch on a couple of them, the verses. So verse 1 says, "Let every soul be subject unto the higher powers, for there is no power but of God. The powers that be are ordained of God." Verse 2, "Whosoever resisteth the powers, resisteth the ordinances of God. And they that resist shall receive to themselves damnation." All right, and I'm going to go to verse 8 through 10. "Owe no man anything but to love one another. For he that loveth another hath fulfilled the law." Okay. Verse 9, "For this thou shalt not commit adultery, thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not bear false witness, thou shalt not covet. And if there be any other commandment, it is briefly comprehended in this saying, namely, thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself." Okay. Now you say, why did he talk about the law? Okay. Well, here's the thing. Jesus didn't come to abolish the law. He came to fulfill the law. He talks about that in Matthew, St. Matthew chapter 5, verse 17. But the thing is just that a lot of times us as church people, we want to get rid of the whole structure of legal, that we have to deal with the legal aspect of things, especially if we're leaders of an organization. We definitely have to deal with the legal aspect of ministry. There's no way around it. If you structure a ministry, you're going to have to deal with the legal aspect of it. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later. But the thing is, just from verse 1 through 10, you'll also see mentioned in there, like verse 3, "For the rulers are not a terror to good works, but to the evil. Will thou then not be afraid of the power? Do that which is good, and thou shalt have praise of the same." Okay, and then verse 4 starts talking about the, kind of more so the legal system of having authority, like the judges, the people in authority, law enforcement. Everyone has a form of power in a physical sense. And God created the natural law. He didn't just create spiritual things. He has a natural principle. An example, we need physical bodies to operate in this physical world, to get spiritual things released into this to this physical world. So we have to deal with a physical body. It's like jumping on the expressway without a car. There's no way you can operate in the same flow of that whole structure unless you are in a vehicle. So we, in the natural sense, like when we start ministries or churches or anything, we need a physical vehicle to actually operate in this physical world. And that deals with a lot of the legal systems. A lot of times people don't like it because they're like, well, I just can hear God and God's in charge of all this. Well, God already set this stuff in motion for us so that we can actually, it could benefit us. Here's an example. Let's say, the church, for example, a lot of times they, receive donations, free will offerings, which is something like you even see in the scripture, them coming in the book of Acts to lay the money at the apostles' feet, and this was to go to help other churches and different things, charitable purposes, right? Now, let's say they take that money and just use it however they want to, which some people have been caught doing in our modern day, taking charitable, like 501c3 exemptions and just getting all that tax-free money and doing whatever they want to with it. That just completely forgetting the whole charitable aspect that Jesus demonstrated and that the government actually holds us accountable to. Let's say they just do that and no accountability, which is actually one of the reasons why a lot of people don't want to go to church today or don't want to give to churches, or even some ministries, because they see all that money going to them, but they don't see a lot of work going into the community. They don't see a lot of charitable activity being done, things that show the love of God and the power of God. But they do see the church building getting bigger. They do see, them trying to get more people into their church. But it's a lot of times, and this is not in every case, but in a lot of times the people in the community may see that all y'all doing is, you don't even know me. I live right across the street from your church and I haven't had one experience of love from anybody in your church, and all you doing is collecting money every Sunday, so where's the charitable function of it? So let's just say there was no accountability structure to just say you could do whatever you want to with it. Well, obviously that opens the door to a lot of, criminal activity, which many, as I said before, have been prosecuted because of using funds like that for non-exempt purposes, charitable purposes as far as when we reference to a religious organization or a church. So again, the laws are there to help, to provide accountability for us as God's people. We're accountable to God, but we're also accountable to man. God made it that way, and there's nothing that we could do about that. That's a part of God. He wants us to be accountable to him ultimately, but he wants us also to be accountable to each other and to the structures that he's established in the system, the legal system. Now, don't get me wrong. There are some things and some laws that do get passed and things that we may not, on a biblical context, don't agree with, of course, but the ultimate purpose that God designed the laws are for our own benefit as his people. And, like running a red light, you run a red light, you get a ticket, right? Well, if they didn't enforce that, then, it'd be a lot more accidents than actually do happen from the people who do try to run the red lights or actually do run the red lights. So just dealing with that a little bit, we have to deal with the natural aspect. I'm about to get to the spiritual stuff now. Okay. So when it comes to the aspect of ministry being, we see, of course, church. We see the Jerusalem church. We see Antioch. We see the 7 churches mentioned in the book of Revelations. We see examples of the church. But you say, well, what about ministry? Okay. Well, Jesus, of course, being a chief example, he had a ministry, a crew, and he even had a treasurer who was Judas. Okay. That is something that also the government of our day requires us to have someone who can take care of the money, and a job description of, accountability for them as well. What keeps them accountable from not just fraudulently doing things with that money, but making sure it goes to the exempt purpose. We see with Paul, we see Philip's ministry, which he connected. He went out there and evangelized. He brought people into the fold, or into the kingdom of heaven. They got saved, and he brought and connected them to the apostles, who the apostles went and planted the church there. That's a connectivity of ministry and continued function. Paul, as I just mentioned him, he had a team of people who worked with him, and they went out and just expanded the kingdom of heaven to all different territories and regions, just expanded, to even where we are, today, because of the work that God had them do. But again, there was no corporation structure, and persecution was like just a free for all until Constantine put a kind of an end to that by saying, okay, we're going to recognize religion, as something that you can't, they have rights. You can't just do whatever you want to anymore. But even with denominations and associations, we see that kind of example as far as Paul and Peter and, the other apostles, trying to keep the churches together, trying to keep them, rallied around Jesus. Now again, a lot of denominations today, unfortunately, some of them do get away from that, and they actually get into more of the corporate structure and focused on building their empire than they are about actually building the kingdom of heaven. But there are some good people out there and good organizations that, and even denominations that are actually trying to still stick to the biblical foundation. So I can't, address everybody that everyone's doing wrong. You're going to always have the good and the bad. That's just the way it is. Jesus said, let the wheat and the tare grow together until God brings that dissension, or, ultimately separates them. So we're going to have it. It just doesn't matter. We can't change that, but you can decide on which side you're going to be on, of course. But the thing is just that, there was a physical structure that they had with their ministry. They were led by the Spirit, but they had a structure, a way of doing things in the early New Testament. Again, starting with Jesus, there was a way of structure, even with him and his treasure. There was a way of finances being dealt with and distributed to people who had need for obviously charitable purposes. So we see that in the Bible, an example as an example of ministry, a ministry organization, which they didn't have that incorporation law back then, but we do today. And so a ministry is supposed to be obviously a charitable entity that's out there helping people, doing the work of the ministry, expanding the kingdom in many different ways, many different creative ways. God uses organizations that have religious purposes that God is using them to actually, reach many people. So again, this was just a little bit, in more detail type training would take a lot more time on the legal aspect of an organization, but just wanted to touch on the topic that, yeah, it's scriptural, that the church is legit, and even ministry organizations, people who are called to go outside the perimeters of the local church and actually expand the kingdom. We see that example in the Bible over and over and over again. That was a normal thing that God was doing with people. But of course, they stay connected to the local body and the universal body as a whole, of course. So just wanted to touch on that a little bit and, just give you a little bit. Of course, if you got any questions, you can contact me at kingdomconstructioncrewministries.org and go right to any of the contact pages and let me know.